What is the scariest encounter with another human you have ever experienced? Part 2. I was investigating a fire for an insurance company in a fourplex in North St. Louis. North St. Louis is a bad area. It was clearly an arson. I had 5 separate, unconnected fires. I'd been there for a while, taking photos and doing my thing. I was drawing my diagram in the building when I hear 2 guys walking by the building on the other side of the wall. I'm straining to hear what they're saying since it could be pertinent to my investigation. The 2 guys get to the rear of the building where the fire department had ripped out the wall to be able to extinguish hot spots they'd found. I can clearly see them both standing there talking. They start to kick through the debris on the ground and one starts saying how some stupid girl had snitched on his buddy for setting this fire. He starts telling the other guy about how he's going to deal with her and pulls a goddamn pistol out of his waistband. At this point, I'm frozen in fear, about to crap my pants, hoping that they don't look 90 degrees and see me standing there like a jackass. So I crouch down as low as I can without making noise and wait. They kept going on about how she told the cops on him. Finally, a car drives by and I use the sound of it to get out of the house through the front door, which unfortunately wasn't super quiet since most of the floor had collapsed and I was wearing fire boots. I get to my truck across the street. I'm sitting in the driver's seat trying to steady my nerves when the guy with the gun walks around the side of the house to the front porch, sits down, and aims it at me. I turned the truck on and got the heck out of there. I ended up going back about an hour later to see if they were gone because I had to finish my scene. It's still one of the top 5 scariest moments of my career so far. I used to work at a pub chain in Canada called Elephant and Castle, and the owners of that particular franchise were absolute jerks who didn't care about their staff. I've since learned that they have been shut down, so that's something. On Thursday and Saturday nights in particular, it would get pretty rowdy because of hockey and some pretty good happy hour deals. We had this one regular, a pretty huge guy, who would consistently cross boundaries with me. He would try to drag me onto his lap when I was serving him and his buddies. He would grab my behind, even after I straight up yelled at him and even slapped him once. I begged my managers and the owners of the pub to ban him, but that didn't happen. The best they would do was to kick him out if he went too far, which usually involved him grabbing me in some way. He was always free to return the next day though, because he was a good customer. One Saturday I was on my cigarette break, in the alley beside the bar, when that creep sneaked up and grabbed me around the waist and started to drag me backward. I immediately went into fight or flight mode and smashed my head backward into his face, ended up breaking his nose pretty badly, and when he dropped me, I was on the ground and kicked up into his groin several times. When I had a moment to think and realized who it was that had attacked me, I took my lit cigarette and put it out on his arm. I was really angry and afraid, and I don't have a very clear memory of the rest of that night. I guess the bouncers arrived at some point and the cops were called. The cops came and I gave my statement. The guy got arrested. I quit that job and never returned to that crappy pub. I never got a chance to find out what happened to the guy, or even what his motivations for grabbing me were, because I moved to Scotland a few months later. Back in the early 90s, I worked as a night auditor for a small motel in Prospect Heights, Illinois. I was a young mother and worked nights while my husband worked days. Occasionally, my husband would stop by and check on me. It was a brutal schedule, and I truly don't know how I made it on only a couple of hours of sleep each day. But I digress. My job was to perform a daily audit on the rooms and money. Also, I would check people in and out of the hotel. The hours were midnight to 8 a.m. One night, I had finished my audit and was watching a scary movie on the little TV they had behind the front desk. It was winter and very cold. A man came up to the door, and he was wearing a ski mask. For a second, I thought it was my husband, so I kind of smiled. He came up to the front desk and I asked if I could help him. He asked me why I had smiled at him. Well, I knew right then I was in trouble. He waved a big knife at me and told me to turn around. I felt the most fear then. I felt like I was going to die. He hopped over the front desk, cut one of the phone lines, and took the money. I had my coat and purse back there and he took those as well. As he left, he said, "I have your purse, I know where you live now." I stayed hunched in the corner behind the front desk as he left. Then I realized he had only cut the handset to one phone and the main line on another, so I took the handset from one phone and attached it to another where he had not cut the main line. I dialed 911 and got an operator on the line. Just as I was about to talk, the guy came back. Apparently, he had dropped his knife behind the desk. I saw it on the floor as he came around. I picked it up. In my mind, I'm thinking, can I attack him? We stood there kind of facing each other, me in my uniform and this big guy in a thick ski jacket. He demanded I give him the knife. I honestly thought that if I tried to fight him, I'd lose and he'd kill me. I gave him the knife. He took the knife and hit me over the head with the handle of it and then left. The police soon came, and I recounted my story. As far as I know, he was never caught. The place I worked for let me have a day off, but when I needed more, I had head injuries, they fired me. It turns out, they had been robbed a few times before but had never put in security. I did take them to court for lost wages and I won. About a year later, maybe less, I saw on the news that a night auditor/clerk at the same hotel had been kidnapped from the motel and was killed. They caught that guy, and he is now in prison. It's been so long, but I rarely talk about this or I just laugh it off like it was no big thing. Obviously, it still affects me greatly. Scariest night of my life. The hotel, when I worked there, was an Econo Lodge, but they apparently changed the name soon after I left to Forest Lodge. So when the story about the kidnapped clerk came on the news, I didn't immediately realize it was the same motel, until they showed a photo of it. Then I knew, and it scared the crap out of me. When I was in middle school, I liked to play in the woods behind my parents' house. Not far down the road was a trailer park that was notorious for meth houses and drug dealers. One day I was building forts like a typical 13-year-old boy when this dude popped out of nowhere. He was carrying an AR and asked me what I was doing. Luckily, he and I both knew each other because he went to school with my older sister and the three of us rode the same bus, but we weren't friends in the least bit. This kid, he was probably 18, started questioning what I was doing and where I had been, and I just told him I was playing, building forts and stuff. He took the AR and fired off a couple of rounds in the middle of me explaining what I was doing. He then went on to threaten me and tell me how easily it would be for him to shoot me and how no one would know. He finished by saying some crap about how he liked me and he didn't want to hurt me. He told me that if I wanted to keep playing in those woods, I should never, ever go past a certain point or else he wouldn't hesitate to shoot me. I very quickly left and ran back to my parents' house. The way he was talking, I knew he was growing pot out in the woods. I never told a soul about that encounter, not even my parents. Now I wish I had called the cops, given them my story, and had that bastard put in jail. But, the dude is serving life in prison now, so he got what was coming to him in the end. Probably the time someone tried to attack me with a screwdriver. It was late at night and I was driving home. On the way, someone tried to cut me off when I was making a turn, which almost resulted in our cars crashing. The other driver was very upset and started following me, flashing his lights to blind me, etc. I had almost arrived home when the driver cut me off again, forced me to park, and blocked my car. He got out with another guy, grabbed a screwdriver, and first tried to open my car door, which I locked just in time. Then he tried smashing my window. I wasn't foolish enough to get out of my car and risk being attacked, so I reached for my phone and started calling a few of my buddies who lived on my street. Luckily, they answered and came outside. The guy with the screwdriver and his buddy saw that they were going to be outnumbered and quickly got away in their car. Overall, it was a very scary experience, and I'm pretty sure if I hadn't locked my door in time, I would have had a huge screwdriver in my body. When I was about 4 years old, I was at the pool swimming in the shallow end while my mom was laying out on a chair nearby. No one else was in the pool enclosure, so I was just in my own little world. All of a sudden, I felt a bump on my back from an inflatable raft that was floating upside down in the pool. Only, it wasn't just floating and bumping against me randomly, it was pushing me. Before I could say anything, the raft lifted up and went over my head. Inside it was a goggled kid laughing like crazy. He dragged me into the deep end while laughing, and I was screaming. Suddenly, something knocked him on the head and ripped the raft up off of us. Mom had kicked this kid in the head and yanked me out of the pool. I don't remember much after that because it was decades ago, but I do remember hearing that the kid was special needs or something. Regardless, that was my face-to-face encounter with the drooling, laughing, goggled kid who I suspect was taking me to the deep end to drown me. My first apartment was part of a complex that was U-shaped with a large grassy area in the middle. The neighborhood kids would run around and play in the grass a lot. One day, I was sitting on my stoop, talking on the phone, when one of the kids fell over, grabbed his foot, and started crying. He was maybe 5 or 6. He had stepped on a bottle cap and sliced open his foot. I took him inside, had him sit on the edge of the tub, washed his cut, put some Neosporin and a band-aid on it, and sent him on his way. A few hours later, there was a knock on my door. When I answered, a massive skinhead with a tattoo of a pentagram on his neck was standing there with his chest out. The boy was peeking around one of his giant thighs, pointing at me. He stuck his finger in my chest and yelled, "Did you take my boy in your freaking house? That's my son. Did you give him a freaking bath? Look at his foot." I shrieked. He cut his foot. I washed the cut. He inspected the kid's foot, then asked me what exactly happened. I stumbled through the story. Then he just said, "All right then." He shook my hand with a vice grip, and I never saw him or his son again. Last year I moved from a dense urban area to a really pretty, underpopulated rural one. I got super into trail running. There's a big, circular route that I like a lot in the local nature preserve, and over the summer I was on an early morning run there when I passed a dude sitting on a rock slightly off the trail. He looked exceedingly normal, street clothes, hat, boots, etc., and I figured him for a hiker. All good. So I make my way down the path, around, uphill and to this nice overlook, where I usually stop to drink from the fountain. It's when I'm bent over at the fountain that I hear a twig snap, and I straighten up to see that guy, crouched over and stepping through the woods off the clearing like he's trying to creep up on me. I bolted. The sprint back was the most terrifying experience of my life, obviously. I don't know if I lost him or if he gave chase at all. The police never found anyone matching his description, and I don't run anywhere near there anymore. I was riding my bike to school, taking the bike trail, when I noticed a guy leaning against a light post. I thought nothing of it since I've taken this trail pretty much every day throughout high school. Anyway, I was riding and things went dark. Turns out, as I passed by, the guy pistol whipped me. I woke up to him trying to take my feet out of the straps of my bike. He noticed I was awake and immediately pointed his gun at me, telling me to hand my bike over. I resisted at first, telling him that my mom had just bought it for me after I begged for so long for it. He took it anyway. It still bugs me to this day. The bike was a Dawes SSTAL. I had clipped pedals at the time, which is why he was struggling to get my feet out. I live in a not-so-nice area where stuff like this is not uncommon, Fontana/Rialto, California. The guy had face tats and dressed like a thug. He would stick out like a sore thumb riding a competitive fixed-gear bicycle. I'm sure he stole it to sell it rather than for personal use. I also called the police and they came over to file a report. I didn't notice I had blood running down from my ear, probably adrenaline, until the cop pointed it out. He took pictures of the cut on my head for the report. I was at a sleepover at my friend's place. We decided to sneak out and wander around aimlessly. We stopped at our school, which had a small patch of trees on the grounds where the older kids hung out during lunch. There were rumors of a great Playboy collection there, hence our visit. While there, my friend stepped off to the side to relieve himself. A few seconds later, he comes rushing back and says, "Run." I didn't know what his deal was, but as a kid in the forest, with only the light of the moon, I figured asking questions was a secondary option to being left alone there. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. Finally, my friend explained that there was some weirdo looking at him while he was relieving himself. Being kids with a history of pranks, I thought he was messing with me. Then I looked back and saw the guy a long way back but moving in our direction. We kept running towards my friend's place and he kept following. When we got back, we thought we had lost him. We snuck back inside and turned off all the lights in the basement. We lay there silently and terrified. About 10 minutes later, we saw something move by the window. We knew someone was out there. We stayed completely still and quiet. A minute later, we heard a noise coming from a room in the basement. We both lost it and started yelling, "Dad," for my friend's dad. He came running down the stairs and we were yelling that someone was in that room. His dad flung open the door, and the window was open. There were fresh marks on the wall from someone climbing in or out. For some reason, he didn't call the police. He decided to stay downstairs with us for the night. I didn't really sleep, and in the morning my friend's dad made me walk home with him. A few blocks away, there were a bunch of police. As we walked by, one of the cops stopped us and asked if we saw anything suspicious last night. We told him the story, which kicked off further questioning. It turned out that a kid went missing from his room right around the same time that we got chased home. They found the guy a few days later, dead from having taken his own life. They never found the boy he abducted. We had a lot of trouble with that. My friend's dad felt guilty for not calling the police. My friend was traumatized by just how close he came to being grabbed in the forest. I went through therapy for a while and still have occasional night terrors from that night, even though it happened years ago. I was trying to take my girlfriend to the hospital since we thought she had appendicitis or something. It was about 12:30 a.m. on a Sunday in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which if you don't know is not the nicest area. We get 2 streets away from where we were living when we come across this street racing type car, neon lights on the rims and stuff like that, pulled out halfway into the road. I stop and wait a while for it to move, and it doesn't. So I pull around it and keep going, but the car accelerates and cuts me off around the bend. It slows down and won't let me past, then a second car. At this point, we were boxed in. A young guy wearing a white tank top and khaki shorts gets out of the car holding a pistol. Someone else in the car hands him a blue bandana, then he starts walking towards us. At this point, I'm starting to realize that this is too many people for a robbery, and there was a reason for him being handed the bandana. It was probably a gang initiation. So I throw the car in reverse and bump a fourth car I hadn't been looking at because I was looking at the guy with the freaking gun. I throw it forward and go to squeeze past the car on the left and the front car when the guy started shooting. He fired 3 shots that thankfully didn't hit either of us. It's important to mention that at this point we were on a sort of back road a bit away from a 4-way intersection with a stoplight. Across the street, there's a shopping center with a 24-hour grocery store. I speed through the red light with the intention of going to the store and asking for help. Before I can make it across, we get T-boned on the passenger side by a completely unrelated vehicle that was going 55 miles per hour. The car spun out, ended up on the side of the road, and was totaled. The guys in the cars took off once other people were involved. I ended up with a traumatic brain injury and whiplash from the car accident and was super paranoid for a very long time afterward. My girlfriend ended up mostly okay, with some bruised ribs and whiplash as well. I had gone out downtown with some friends for Halloween to a couple of bars. I had an early day following, so I hadn't been drinking much and was still sober. I left the bar around 11, so I could beat the rush of people and catch a cab home quickly. There weren't a lot of cabs stopping near the bar area, so I started walking to the bus stop section where a lot of cabs parked to wait for fares. I kept to the busy section since it was still early, so a lot of people were still out. This guy was all of a sudden in step with me and asked if I had any luck finding a cab. I said, no, but there are usually a bunch waiting up with the buses that way. I pretty much ignored him after that as he walked beside me. I kept my distance and watched him out of the corner of my eye, making sure we were in a populated area, etc. As we approached the last street before we hit the main road where the cabs and buses were, he started talking again, asking me if I had the time, if I had gum or a mint. Thinking back on it, I think he was trying to distract me or slow me down. Lucky for me, my phone was dead, and I knew I didn't have any of that in my purse, so I just said, no, and kept walking. Finally, he just grabbed my arm and said, come with me, and tried to pull me into an alley. I screamed and started fighting him off, and then these guys dressed as the 3 amigos came over yelling at him to let me go. He did and took off. The 3 guys walked me over to a police officer who I left a report with, and then I made my way to a cab and went home. I think if I had been drunk or if he'd been able to distract me, or if those 3 guys hadn't been paying attention or cared, he would have dragged me off into the alley. I just spent a fantastic Saturday evening at a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. One beer led to another, and before long single malt whiskey found its way into the party. I left his house at about 12:30 a.m. and caught a tram home. The tram was crowded enough that I needed to stand near the door. Sometime around halfway home the tram stopped at a station, and I looked up from the book I was reading to see some enraged guy charging across the tracks, yelling as he came towards me. Because my blood was somewhere around 20% Scotch, it took me a while to realize that he was running across the tracks towards me specifically. I heard him yell. I saw his saliva splatter on the tram door. He punched the tram door twice, really hard. Thankfully, the tram doors don't open on the other side while it stopped at the station, today I learned. As the tram began to depart, he still held on for a few seconds while some of the other folks on the tram, safe in the knowledge he couldn't get in, started to tease him. Incidentally, they called him a prawn, which wasn't an insult I'd heard before. I have no idea who he was, or what provocation he perceived, or what he would have tried if he'd opened the doors. Naturally, once the tram left him behind, I tried to just kind of stand there, looking unperturbed. It was only the next morning that I thought how much worse that situation might have ended up if the tram door had opened, or if I had been walking past this guy instead of on public transport. I used to work as a cashier in a Middle Eastern restaurant, and we'd get a lot of interesting people coming in. One day, while the manager and cooks were busy, a pretty, normal-looking guy came in and asked for water. No biggie. Then he started asking questions about what ethnicity the owners were and if I was related to them, and while those questions weren't inherently threatening, he spoke the same way the Joker did. Like he was about to do something bad to you and you couldn't escape it because he had already set up a trap. He left. He returned less than a minute later with a black duffel bag and another guy who looked homeless blocking the doorway. I legitimately thought he was about to pull out a gun and try to rob the place or shoot me. Instead, he told me to tell the owner exactly what he'd been asking me and he left. Nothing bad really happened, but I was terrified that he would come back, and I eventually left the place because of it. During a camping trip, we woke up in the middle of the night to rocks hitting the walls of our cabin. They were being thrown at intervals, like once every 10 seconds or so. What's even more strange is that we could hear them making some weird noises too, like they were trying to scare us or something, and they sure did. This happened for a couple of minutes until we heard them walking away in their heavy boots. We remained quiet the entire time, never leaving our beds. The next morning, we saw pebbles scattered around our cabin. We reported the incident to the local rangers that day but never heard back from them. To this day, we still don't know who, what, or why this happened. The pessimistic side of me thinks there was a group of home invaders who were waiting for a response from us to confirm there were people inside the cabin, but I'd like to think it was just some drunk teens pranking around our campsite. Either way, it was a scary night.